The air in the obsidian room was as heavy and still as time itself, thick with the scent of aged leather, rare orchids, and the quiet hum of immense wealth. It was a place where conversations were conducted in hushed tones, but their consequences echoed through boardrooms and stock markets across the globe. Here power wasn't flaunted, it was simply inhaled with every breath. Ethan Davies moved through this rarefied atmosphere like a ghost, his black and white uniform a study in self-effacement, his steps silent on the plush, dark carpet. To the titans of industry and finance who dined here, he was less a person and more an extension of the room's flawless service. A hand that appeared with a perfectly chilled glass, a presence that refilled water without a sound, a face trained to be utterly forgettable. Tonight his focus was a sprawling corner table, a small island of barely concealed tension in the calm sea of the restaurant. At its head sat Eleanor Vance, a woman carved from ice and ambition. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant, severe chignon, and her eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing. She was a corporate predator, a legend known for acquiring companies, stripping them of their assets, and leaving the hollowed-out shells for others to mourn. Flanking her were her two lieutenants, Michael, her chief counsel, a man whose permanent expression of anxiety was etched into the lines around his eyes, and Sarah Chen, a young analyst, whose brilliant mind was at war with her visibly troubled conscience. The redundancies are not a moral failing, Sarah. They are a mathematical necessity, Eleanor was saying, her voice a low, cutting instrument. She gestured with a breadstick, using it like a scalpel to dissect the fate of thousands. The pension fund is an archaic liability, an anchor. We cut it loose, reallocate the capital, and the entire vessel moves faster. It's simple economics. Sarah Chen flinched, her gaze dropping to the meticulously folded napkin in her lap. But these are people's lives, Miss Vance. Their entire retirement. Eleanor let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any warmth. Life is a risk, Sarah. They bet on the wrong company. I am simply the consequence of their poor investment. Ethan approached the table, a bottle of Sancerre breathing in a silver bucket of ice. He moved with the practiced grace of a dancer, his presence meant to be felt but not seen. As he reached for Michael's empty glass, Eleanor waved a dismissive hand, not even bothering to look at him. Not him, the girl. She looks like she needs it. He paused, his hand hovering over the bottle. It was a small cruelty, a casual flick of her power to diminish Sarah in front of her superior, to frame her empathy as a weakness requiring alcohol to soothe. If that casual cruelty made your blood boil too, show some love and hit that like button. Ethan's expression remained a perfect mask of serene deference, but inside a cold fire ignited. He had seen this 100 times. Power that didn't just ignore the powerless, but took pleasure in reminding them of their station. He poured the wine for Sarah, his movements fluid and precise. His eyes, for a fraction of a second, met hers. He saw the flicker of shame, the desperate desire to be anywhere else. She was young, brilliant, and already being poisoned by the casual inhumanity of this world. The numbers are solid. Eleanor, Michael interjected, shuffling papers in his briefcase as if the rustling sound could distract from the moral void of their conversation. The acquisition can be finalized by Friday. The motion to absorb the pension trust is legally grey, but defensible. I don't pay you for defensible party, Michael. I pay you for invulnerable, Eleanor retorted, her gaze sweeping the room with the boredom of a queen surveying her uninteresting court. Her eyes passed over Ethan without a flicker of recognition. He was furniture, an object, and that was his greatest weapon. As he retreated from the table, his mind was not on his next task. It was miles away in a small, meticulously clean apartment in Queens, a place that smelled of antiseptic wipes and cinnamon toast. He saw a small girl with wide, curious eyes and a smile that could disarm armies. Lily, his 6-year-old niece. He could feel the phantom weight of her small hand in his, could hear the faint, rhythmic whir of the portable oxygen machine that was her constant companion. Lily, whose world was held together by the very threads Eleanor Vance was preparing to cut for profit. The company Eleanor was targeting, a regional manufacturing firm in Pennsylvania, wasn't just a line on a balance sheet to him. It was the place his brother-in-law had worked for 25 years before he passed. It was the source of the pension that paid for his sister's mortgage and, most critically, the comprehensive health insurance that covered Lily's staggering medical bills. Her congenital heart condition was a relentless thief, stealing her breath, her energy, her childhood. The pension was their shield, the only thing standing between Lily and a world of impossible choices. He remembered his last visit to the hospital, the sterile smell, the quiet beeping of monitors. Lily had been drawing in a sketchbook, her small fingers clutching a crayon. She had looked up at him, her expression serious. "Uncle Ethan," she had whispered, her breath catching slightly, "when I get my new heart, can we go to the ocean? I want to see a real shark." He had swallowed the lump in his throat and smiled. "We'll go see all the sharks, sweetheart, I promise." Now, standing in the opulent silence of the obsidian room, he was watching a real shark circle its prey. Eleanor Vance wasn't just acquiring a company, she was devouring his family's future. She was devouring his promise to Lily. His past life, the one he had walked away from, came rushing back. The years spent in sterile government offices, drafting the arcane, labyrinthine regulations that governed the very flow of capital. He had been one of the architects of the system, a man who understood its hidden passages, its secret levers, and its subtle tripwires. He had left that world, disgusted by the way the wealthy and powerful could hire armies of lawyers like Michael to twist his intricate rules into weapons against the very people they were meant to protect. He had sought anonymity, a quiet life where he could simply be an uncle, a caregiver. But they had brought the war to his door. He refilled a water glass at a neighboring table, his movements automatic, his mind a whirlwind of subsections and legal precedents. He had seen this play before. The leveraging of assets, the creation of shell corporations, the slow, legalistic strangulation of workers' benefits. But Eleanor's particular brand of hubris, her open contempt for the lives she was destroying, made her predictable. It made her vulnerable. Ethan returned to his station near the kitchen, a silent sentinel watching the scene at Eleanor's table unfold. He saw Sarah Chen push her untouched plate away. He saw Michael wipe a bead of sweat from his brow, despite the room's perfect climate control. And he saw Eleanor, radiant and untouchable, raising her glass in a silent toast to her own genius. In that moment, a quiet resolve settled over Ethan. His time in the shadows was over. He had built the cage, and for years he had watched the predators roam free. Now he would guide one of them into it. He would not do it with laws written from a distant office. He would do it here, in her world, on her stage. He would use his invisibility as a cloak, his knowledge as a blade. The waiter they couldn't see, the man they dismissed as nothing, was about to become the consequence of their own arrogance. He picked up another chilled bottle, his grip steady, and began to walk back toward her table. The hunt had just begun. The heavy oak door of the obsidian room closed behind Ethan Davies with a soft final click. Sealing the world of clinking crystal and hushed power plays away from the raw, indifferent noise of the New York City night. He stripped off the starched white jacket in the cramped staff locker room, the fabric still holding the faint, cloying scent of expensive perfume and aged scotch. The uniform was a costume, a cloak of invisibility, and shedding it felt like taking a first, deep breath after being held underwater. He was no longer the phantom gliding between tables. He was just a man, tired to his bones, heading for the rumbling belly of the subway. He bypassed the dilapidated tenement building in Queens, the one listed on his employment records as a deliberate misdirection, a ghost address for a ghost employee. His journey continued deeper into the borough, to a quiet, tree-lined street of modest two-family homes. His apartment was small, but meticulously clean, filled not with the cold austerity of his official decoy, but with the warm clutter of a life lived and cherished. The scent of cinnamon and old books hung in the air. In the living room, a small mountain of colorful pillows and blankets was arranged on the floor, and in the center of it, sleeping soundly, was Lily. His 6-year-old niece was the sun around which his entire universe revolved. Her chest rose and fell in a steady, peaceful rhythm that belied the traitorous heart beating within it. A thin tube snaked from a quiet, humming machine beside her, delivering the oxygen that her body struggled to process on its own. Ethan knelt beside her, his large hand gently brushing a stray curl from her forehead. Her congenital condition was a shadow that followed them everywhere, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety that informed every decision he made. The treatments were astronomically expensive, the specialists few and far between, and the stability of it all was tethered to the very pension fund Eleanor Vance was about to gut like a fish. He watched her sleep, and the quiet rage he kept so carefully banked within him flickered to life. It was a cold, clean fire, not a blaze of passion. He had seen this kind of casual destruction before from a much higher vantage point. As he moved to his small desk in the corner, cluttered with legal texts and economic journals, his mind drifted back. He remembered the sterile conference rooms, the endless spreadsheets, the weight of a 1,000-page regulatory bill in his hands. He had been the rule architect, one of the sharpest minds at the Securities and Exchange Commission, a man who believed in the elegant power of a well-crafted law to create a fair and just market. He wrote the rules that were supposed to protect people like Lily, to build firewalls between predators and prey. If you build a strong enough system, he once argued with a senior colleague, you can make decency the most profitable option. The colleague had just laughed, a bitter, knowing sound. Ethan, he'd said, you don't understand. For people like them, the rules aren't walls. They're just a jungle gym they get to climb. His disillusionment had been a slow erosion, not a sudden break. It was the loopholes he'd see exploited. The armies of lawyers hired to twist the spirit of a law into a pretzel, the revolving door between regulatory bodies and the corporate giants they were meant to police. The final straw had been a case eerily similar to this one, a leveraged buyout that vaporized the retirement savings of an entire town in Ohio. He had watched, helpless from within the system, as the company's CEO walked away with a 9-figure bonus while families lost their homes. He resigned a week later, quietly, without fanfare, understanding that the system he helped build was too compromised. He couldn't fight the monsters from inside the castle anymore. He had to go out into the wilderness and hunt them himself. Across the river, in a sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, Eleanor Vance raised a flute of champagne. The apartment was a monument to minimalist wealth, all glass, chrome, and stark white marble. A space so devoid of personal warmth, it felt more like a corporate art gallery than a home. She was celebrating her preliminary victory in the acquisition of Sterling Manufacturing, the very company that supported Lily's community. To efficiency, Eleanor declared, her voice sharp and clear. Her tired lawyer, Michael, raised his glass with a practiced, weary smile. His eyes were shadowed with fatigue, the lines around them etched deeper with every one of Eleanor's morally ambiguous victories. There are still some sensitivities around the pension fund restructuring. Eleanor, Michael ventured carefully, the optics could be challenging. Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. Optics are for politicians, Michael. I deal in absolutes. That fund is an inefficient allocation of capital. We are liberating it for more productive ventures. It's simple economics. If a few factory workers have to adjust their retirement plans, that is the unfortunate but necessary price of progress. She took a delicate sip of her champagne, her gaze cold. At a small, respectfully distant table, Sarah Chen, the young analyst, pretended to study a spreadsheet on her tablet. Her hands trembled slightly. She had run the numbers. She knew adjust their retirement plans was a sterile euphemism for financial ruin. She had taken this job with stars in her eyes, awed by Eleanor Vance's reputation as a trailblazing woman in a man's world. But the reality was a slow drip poison to her soul. She felt complicit, a cog in a machine designed to crush people she would never meet. She looked up and caught Michael's eye for a fraction of a second. She saw in his exhausted expression a grim reflection of her own future if she stayed on this path. The thought terrified her. The final papers will be ready for signing in 48 hours, Michael reported, changing the subject. Once they're filed, the asset reallocation is legally locked in, irreversible. Excellent, Eleanor said, a thin, predatory smile gracing her lips. See to it that there are no delays. Back in Queens, the city lights cast a soft glow into Ethan's apartment. Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring a name from a dream. Ethan went to her side, adjusted her blanket, and whispered a reassurance she wouldn't consciously hear, but might feel in her soul. He returned to his desk, his face set like stone. On his laptop screen was a complex document, dense with legal jargon. It was the new regulatory addendum, subsection 7b, paragraph 4. His addendum. He had spent the last 6 months subtly feeding the core principles of the legislation to a former trusted colleague still inside the SEC, framing it as a necessary modernization to close emerging offshore loopholes. It had been signed into law a month ago, a ticking time bomb hidden in plain sight within thousands of pages of financial code, waiting for the right predator to step on it. Eleanor Vance was toasting her irreversible victory. Michael was drowning his conscience in vintage champagne. Sarah was staring into the abyss of her compromised ideals. And Ethan Davies, the man they saw as nothing more than a servile extension of a champagne bucket, was finalizing the sequence. He typed a short, encrypted message from a burner phone, sending it to a financial journalist he had cultivated as a source for years. It contained no names, just a single line. Watch Vance Industries closely tomorrow. An acquisition is about to become a liability. He closed the laptop. The trap was set. As Eleanor's acquisition of the manufacturing company moved into its final destructive phase, threatening the life of the one person he loved more than anything, his own plan was also reaching its denouement. The storm he had so meticulously engineered was about to break, and he knew with chilling certainty that Eleanor Vance would never see it coming. The hum of the Vance Industries penthouse was the sound of a perfectly tuned engine of commerce, a low thrum of ambition that permeated the very air. Eleanor Vance sat behind a desk carved from a single slab of Italian marble, a monument to her own unyielding will. Before her lay the final acquisition documents for Penn Sterling Manufacturing, a sheaf of papers that represented the end of one world and the expansion of her own. She held a pen, a fountain pen worth more than the car Ethan Davies drove to work, and its gold nib hovered over the signature line like a bird of prey. Across from her, Michael fidgeted with his tie, his face a roadmap of sleepless nights. "Eleanor, I've run the numbers again," he began, his voice thin. "The pension fund reallocation, it's aggressive. If there are any regulatory complications, the exposure—" "Michael!" Eleanor cut him off, her tone as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "Your job is to manage exposure, not to cultivate anxiety. Are we legally compliant based on current statutes?" He swallowed. "Based on current, yes, but the landscape is always shifting." Eleanor's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. "Then we move before it shifts." Her gaze flicked to Sarah Chen, who stood beside Michael, clutching a tablet. The young analyst looked pale, her usual bright-eyed enthusiasm dimmed. "Sarah, you've done good work. The vulnerability analysis was thorough." The compliment was a weapon, her casual acknowledgement of the very work that would decimate a community. Sarah managed a small nod, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Thank you, Ms. Vance." With a flourish, Eleanor signed her name. The ink, a deep, blood-like crimson, bled into the paper, sealing the fate of thousands. "It is done," she declared, placing the pen down with a decisive click. "Book my usual table at the Obsidian Room for 9 tonight. A celebration is in order." She stood, smoothing the lines of her bespoke power suit. "We will toast to the future, our future." Hours later, in a cramped locker room that smelled of starch and polish, Ethan Davies methodically fastened the buttons on his crisp white waiter's jacket. Each movement was precise, economical, honed by months of practice. This was not a uniform, it was camouflage. He checked his reflection in the cracked mirror, the downcast eyes, the carefully neutral expression, the posture of deference. He was invisible, a ghost who drifted through the gilded halls of power, and tonight that invisibility was his greatest asset. He pulled his phone from his locker, the screen illuminating with a photo of his niece, Lily. She was smiling, a gap-toothed grin of pure 6-year-old joy, a small bandage on her finger from some playground adventure. He traced the line of her cheek with his thumb. This was not about vengeance, it was about protection. This was for her future, for the hundreds of families like hers who saw Penn Sterling not as an asset to be stripped, but as a promise. He put the phone away. The image of her smile burned into his mind. The final piece of his plan had clicked into place that afternoon when a low-level contact at the SEC had confirmed off the record that the wire instructions for the Penn Sterling pension fund transfer had been finalized. Eleanor's move was imminent. His had to be too. The obsidian room was a cathedral of quiet wealth. Soft light from recessed chandeliers glinted off crystal glasses and polished silver. Conversations were murmurs, laughter was restrained, and the air was thick with the scent of money and expensive perfume. Ethan moved through it all with practiced grace, a phantom in black and white. He saw Eleanor's party arrive. She entered not as a guest, but as a conquering monarch returning to her court. Michael trailed in her wake, looking more like a prisoner than a counsel, while Sarah Chen tried to project a confidence she clearly did not feel, her movements stiff and uncertain. They were seated at table 7, a prime corner booth that offered both privacy and a commanding view of the entire room. It was Eleanor's throne. From there, she could survey her kingdom. Ethan was assigned to their section, a fact that was no coincidence. He had arranged it himself weeks ago, cultivating a reputation for silent efficiency that made him the preferred server for the club's most demanding patrons. A bottle of the 96 Domaine de la Romanée Conti, Eleanor commanded without looking at him, her attention fixed on a rival CEO across the room. "And be quick about it." "Of course, madam," Ethan murmured, his voice a perfect blend of respect and subservience. As he returned with the legendary vintage, he moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace. He was no longer just a waiter, he was a strategist, and this was his battlefield. He presented the bottle to Eleanor, who gave it a cursory, dismissive nod. As he began the meticulous ritual of opening it, he positioned himself just so, a silent observer at the edge of their victory celebration. "The board signed off without a single objection," Michael was saying, a relieved tremor in his voice. "The final transfer of the pension assets is scheduled for Monday morning, 0800 sharp." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Is there any way to you cushion the blow for the employees? A more robust severance package, perhaps?" Eleanor let out a short, derisive laugh. "Cushion the blow? My dear Sarah, we are not a charity, we are a business. Their cushion is the cold, hard reality of market efficiency." She took a sip of water, her eyes glittering. "Their sentimentality is their weakness. It's why people like them work, and people like us own." That was it. The final confirmation, the exact timeline. Monday morning. Ethan felt a profound, chilling stillness settle over him. The decision was no longer a strategic possibility, it was an operational imperative. The world narrowed to this single table, to this one moment. He finished pouring the wine, the rich, dark liquid filling the glasses. In his mind, he rehearsed the words not of a waiter, but of an architect. He saw the precise phrasing of the addendum he had spent months crafting, the legal tripwire hidden in plain sight within thousands of pages of financial regulation. Subsection 7b, paragraph 4. It was a masterpiece of legislative warfare, and Eleanor Vance was about to walk directly into its kill zone. He moved away from the table, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. He went to the service station, his hands steady as he polished a wine glass that was already spotless. He was not nervous, he was focused. He felt a strange sense of calm, the deep certainty of a man whose actions were aligned perfectly with his convictions. He was about to dismantle an empire not with a bomb but with a sentence. He was about to expose a predator, not with a shout, but with a whisper. He looked across the room at Eleanor Vance. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the picture of untouchable power, a queen in her gilded cage, completely unaware that the bars were about to snap shut. Ethan placed the polished glass back on the tray. He picked up the silver ice bucket containing a perfectly chilled bottle of champagne she would inevitably order for her final toast. He took a deep breath, letting the controlled chaos of the dining room wash over him one last time. The low hum of conversation, the clink of silverware, the soft music. It was all a prelude. He began his walk back toward table 7, his steps measured and deliberate. Each footfall on the plush carpet was silent, but in his mind it was the heavy, inexorable tread of justice. Eleanor was raising her wine glass, her lips already forming the first words of a victory speech. The air around the table was electric with her triumph. Ethan reached her side, the cold silver of the ice bucket brushing against the velvet of the booth, just as she was about to speak. The moment had arrived. The air in the obsidian room was a carefully curated symphony of hushed power, the gentle clink of baccarat crystal, the low murmur of billion-dollar deals, the scent of aged leather and expensive perfume. At the room's gravitational center, enthroned in a plush velvet chair, Eleanor Vance held court. Her hand, adorned with a single, severe diamond, was raised. Her index finger pointed directly at the waiter standing beside her table. A dismissive sneer twisted her perfectly painted lips as she barked her order, her voice a whip crack in the opulent silence. "Waiter," she snapped, "refill these glasses and try not to spill a drop of this liquid gold. Your kind rarely gets to touch anything so valuable." The symphony stopped. Conversations evaporated mid-syllable. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Every eye in the room, from titans of industry to their impeccably dressed companions, swiveled to witness the blatant, casual cruelty. Her lawyer, Michael, winced, a flicker of profound discomfort crossing his weary face. The young analyst, Sarah Chen, stared down at her plate, her cheeks burning with a shame that was not her own. But Ethan Davies, the imperturbable waiter, did not flinch. He did not bow his head. He did not offer a placating smile. Instead, he raised his gaze, and for the first time that night, his eyes, calm, intelligent, and utterly unreadable, met Eleanor's directly. The room held its breath, a collective, silent gasp suspended in the heavy air. With hands as steady as a surgeon's, Ethan poured the champagne, the golden liquid cascading into her flute without a single tremor. He placed the bottle back into its silver bucket with a soft, deliberate click. Then, leaning in just enough for his voice to carry to her and her immediate entourage, he spoke. The words were not a plea, not an apology, but a low, controlled rumble that vibrated with an authority she had never encountered in a subordinate. "Madam," he murmured, his tone devoid of fear, "do not dare me." A flicker of surprise, then amusement, danced in Eleanor's eyes. She leaned back, the velvet of her chair groaning softly, a derisive smirk spreading across her face. This was a new and interesting diversion. "Dare you?" she scoffed, her voice dripping with condescension. "And what precisely, little man, would happen if I dared a mere waiter?" This was the moment, the pivot upon which everything would turn. Ethan straightened to his full height, his posture no longer that of a servant, but of an arbiter. He did not raise his voice, he did not need to. The crushing silence of the room amplified his every word. "So you are celebrating the acquisition of a regional manufacturing company," he began, his voice as precise as a legal brief. "You intend to leverage its assets, but more specifically, you plan to exploit a perceived loophole to displace its pension fund, redirecting those assets through a newly established shell corporation in Delaware." Michael, the lawyer, went rigid. His fork clattered onto his plate. This was not conjecture. It was verbatim from their most confidential strategy documents. Ethan's gaze remained locked on Eleanor. "A move that will leave several thousand families who dedicated their entire working lives to that company completely destitute." He paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. "It is a clever, predatory, and, until last month, arguably legal maneuver." Eleanor's smirk faltered, replaced by a slight, almost imperceptible narrowing of her eyes. She was no longer amused. She was intrigued, and perhaps, for the first time in a decade, a little unnerved. "However," Ethan continued, his voice dropping another register, becoming even more potent in the stillness, "the money from that pension fund, which you intend to reallocate, will be irrevocably locked by a new regulatory addendum, implemented just last month. Specifically, subsection 7B, paragraph 4. The color began to drain from Eleanor Vance's face. It started at her neck, a pale tide rising to bleach her cheeks of their confident glow. Michael's face was now ashen. He was frantically, uselessly, thumbing through files on his tablet under the table. Sarah Chen looked up, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. Ethan delivered the killing blow. "This addendum, which I am intimately familiar with, transforms your intended maneuver from a gray area asset strip into a cross-jurisdictional financial crime. The moment you execute the final transfer, it will immediately trigger an automatic execution clause on every single share you've pledged as collateral across all your current holdings. Every single one, Miss Vance. The dam of Eleanor's formidable composure did not just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. The acquisition predator, the shark of Wall Street, was suddenly and publicly impaled. She wasn't just facing a minor setback or a legal challenge. She was teetering on the precipice of total, absolute annihilation. Her entire empire, the meticulous architecture of a lifetime of ruthless ambition, was about to crumble into dust because of a single paragraph she never knew existed. Chaos, once unthinkable in the hallowed halls of the Obsidian Room, erupted. Michael was stammering, a string of incoherent apologies and legal jargon spilling from his lips as he fumbled with his briefcase, dropping a sheaf of papers onto the floor. Sarah Chen was trembling visibly, her innocent hopes for a brilliant career collapsing into the monstrous reality of her firm's nefarious dealings. Eleanor Vance, her face a mask of disbelief and incandescent fury, sprang from her seat. The legs of her chair scraped across the polished marble floor with a sound like a scream. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. With a strangled gasp, she turned and fled the dining room, her hurried footsteps echoing her humiliation, leaving behind a wake of shocked whispers, overturned wine glasses, and the ghost of her own hubris. She retreated to her penthouse, the sprawling glass-walled sanctuary overlooking Central Park that had always been her fortress. Now it felt like a cage. Her mind was a maelstrom of fury, denial, and a terrifying, cold dread. How could he know? How could a waiter know the most guarded secrets of her operation? Her hands trembled as she snatched a vintage telephone from its cradle. Her one command hissed into the receiver to Marcus Thorne, her soulless, brutally efficient head of security. "Find that waiter," she ordered, her voice ragged. "Find him now, and make him tell me everything." But the man was a ghost. An hour later, Marcus reported back, his own voice tinged with a rare note of confusion. The employment records were a dead end. The address Ethan Davies had provided was a dilapidated tenement building in a forgotten, decaying corner of Queens. When Marcus's heavily armed team breached the apartment, they found nothing. No furniture, no clothes, no life. Just a bare mattress on a dusty floor, and on the windowsill a single well-worn textbook, Advanced Studies in Regulatory Economics. It was a taunt. A ghost had vanished, leaving behind only the weapon he had used to gut her. Eleanor slammed the phone down. She paced her vast living room like a caged panther, the city lights glittering mockingly below. Frantically, she worked her other phones, calling her contacts deep within the financial world, her voice shaking with a desperate need for this to be a lie, a bluff, a nightmare. But one by one, the chilling confirmations came in. The regulatory addendum was real. Subsection 7b, paragraph 4, was real. It was obscure, meticulously crafted, and utterly, devastatingly real. It was a perfect trap, and she had walked right into it. Staring at the abyss of her impending ruin, the silence of the penthouse was suddenly pierced by the shrill, alien ring of her private cell phone. She rarely gave out the number. She froze, staring at the screen. Unknown caller. With a trembling finger, she answered, holding the phone to her ear without a word. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a deep, measured voice came through the line, a voice she had heard just hours before in a crowded dining room. It was calm. It was controlled. It held all the power in the world. "Miss Vance," the voice said, "it's time we talked, alone." The silence on the line was a chasm, a void where Eleanor Vance's formidable power used to reside. Now it was just dead air, filled only by the frantic thumping of her own heart against her ribs. She stood in the center of her penthouse, the glittering lights of Manhattan spread out below her like a carpet of fallen stars, but she saw none of it. Her world had shrunk to the cold, smooth surface of the phone pressed against her ear and the calm, measured voice that had just dismantled her life's work. "Who is this?" she finally managed, the words a ragged whisper, a pale imitation of her usual commanding tone. "I knew me an hour ago as Ethan Davies, your waiter," the voice replied, devoid of triumph or malice. It was the dispassionate tone of an auditor reading a final verdict. "But that name is a tool, Ms. Vance, just as the uniform was. My real identity is of little consequence. What matters is what I am. For 2 decades, I was one of the senior architects at the Federal Regulatory Commission. So I wrote the rules, Ms. Vance, the very same arcane, tedious, and labyrinthine codes you and your kind have spent your careers trying to circumvent. I am the reason subsection 7b, paragraph 4 exists." Eleanor sank into a nearby armchair, the plush Italian leather offering no comfort. An architect, not a waiter, not a corporate spy, but a ghost from the very system she had learned to master and exploit. He had built the cage, and then he had patiently waited for her to walk into it. "Why?" she asked, the question laced with a fury she could no longer afford to show. "What do you get out of this? A rival firm? Money?" A soft, humorless chuckle echoed down the line. "You still see the world through such a narrow lens. This was never about a competitor. It was about a small manufacturing company in Ohio, a company whose pension fund you were about to gut like a fish, leaving thousands of families with nothing after a lifetime of labor. You see them as collateral damage, unavoidable efficiencies." He repeated her own words from the dinner table back to her, and they tasted like ash in her mouth. "I see them as my family, my neighbors. I see them as the people who helped raise me." His voice softened, but only just, losing its clinical edge and gaining a sliver of something far more dangerous: personal conviction. "One of the beneficiaries of that fund is my 6-year-old niece, Lily. She has a congenital heart condition that requires specialized, continuous, and crushingly expensive care. That pension isn't an abstract asset on a balance sheet to be leveraged. It is her lifeline. It is the only thing standing between her and a death sentence you would have signed without a second thought for a few extra percentage points on your quarterly earnings. You declared war on my family, Ms. Vance. You just didn't know it." The pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a random act of corporate sabotage. It was a meticulously planned, deeply personal execution. He hadn't just set a trap. He had forged it in the fire of his own life, designed it specifically for her. "What do you want?" Eleanor's voice was flat, defeated. The fight had drained out of her, replaced by the cold, pragmatic dread of a survivor. "I want restoration," Ethan said, his tone shifting back to that of a man dictating terms. "And I want a new world order, starting with you. You will listen, you will not interrupt, and you will comply with every single directive. First, the acquisition of Sterling Manufacturing is to be terminated, immediately and irrevocably. You will issue a public statement citing unforeseen ethical concerns. You will also create a fund to provide full compensation, with interest, to any employees whose positions were already impacted by your preliminary restructuring." He paused, letting the weight of the first demand settle. Eleanor's mind raced, calculating the cost, the public relations nightmare. It was staggering. "Second," he continued, ignoring her strained breathing, "you will make an anonymous donation of 100 million United States dollars to the Sterling Manufacturing Pension Fund. This is not a penalty. It is a fortification. You will secure the futures you intended to steal, ensuring that Lily and every other child and grandchild of those workers will be protected for generations to come. The transaction will be untraceable back to you, routed through a charity of my choosing. $100 million. The figure was obscene, but she knew it was well within her capacity. It was also the price of her silence. Third, you have a young analyst, Sarah Chen. She was at your table tonight. She is intelligent, principled, and visibly disturbed by your methods. Tomorrow morning you will promote her. You will create a new position for her, Director of Ethical Compliance for all of Vance Industries. Her department will have unilateral veto power over any acquisition or merger that fails a rigorous ethical review. She will be your conscience, Ms. Vance, institutionalized and empowered. This was the most insulting demand of all. To cede control, to install a moral gatekeeper within the walls of her own empire, it was a humiliation far greater than the financial loss. And fourth, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a low, intense rumble that sent a chill through her. Your talent for predatory acquisition is formidable. It would be a waste to let it atrophy. So from this day forward, you will hunt for me. You will use your resources, your intellect, and your ruthless instincts to identify other companies like yours, firms that prey on the vulnerable, that exploit loopholes to destroy lives. You will find them, you will expose their weaknesses to me, and you will assist me in dismantling them from the inside out, ethically and legally. Your power will no longer serve your greed, it will serve justice, my justice. The line went quiet. He was offering her a leash, not a prison sentence, a chance to keep her empire, albeit as a servant to a master she could not see. The alternative was clear: total annihilation, the public disgrace, the federal investigations, the end of everything. "What is the price for this arrangement?" she whispered, the last embers of her pride extinguished. "It is not money," Ethan replied, his voice as final as a judge's gavel. "It is obedience, absolute and unwavering. If you refuse, if you deviate, if I even sense you are planning to betray me, the complete dossier on your attempted raid of the Sterling Fund, every document, every email, every recorded call, will be delivered to every major news outlet, regulatory body, and federal prosecutor in this nation. It will not just bury your company, it will bury you. Do we have an understanding, Ms. Vance?" She closed her eyes. The view of the city was gone. All she could see was the face of a waiter, his eyes calm and unyielding. "Yes," she said, the word a tiny, broken thing. "We have an understanding." The next morning, Wall Street awoke to a seismic shock. A press release from Vance Industries announced the immediate termination of the Sterling manufacturing acquisition, along with the establishment of a multi-billion-dollar Ethics and Social Responsibility Fund. Financial news anchors spoke in bewildered tones about the sudden, unprecedented pivot from one of the market's most ruthless players. The story was eclipsed only by a second. Even more bizarre announcement: the promotion of a junior analyst, Sarah Chen, to the newly created C-suite role of Director of Ethical Compliance, a move pundits called either revolutionary or insane. In her sterile, glass-walled office high above the city, Eleanor Vance watched the news flicker across a dozen screens. She felt nothing. No anger, no relief. Only the cold, heavy certainty of her new reality. She picked up a tablet and began scrolling through market data, her eyes scanning for weaknesses, for bloated valuations, for companies over-leveraged in their own cruelty. Her hunt had already begun. She was still a predator, her instincts as sharp as ever, but the scent she now followed was not of profit, but of corruption. She was a hound, and she had a new master. Miles away, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Queens, Ethan Davies knelt on the floor, helping a little girl with bright eyes and a mischievous smile fit a puzzle piece into place. Lily giggled as the cardboard lion finally found its home in the savannah scene. He was no longer the rule architect or the imperturbable waiter. He was just Uncle Ethan. He glanced at his phone, which lay face down on the coffee table. He didn't need to check it. He knew the news. He knew the transfer to the pension fund had been made. He knew a formidable weapon named Eleanor Vance was now aimed in a new direction. He felt her silent, grudging acknowledgement across the distance, a ripple in the vast ocean of power and finance. He offered no response, no glance toward the distant Manhattan skyline. His attention was here, on this small, perfect moment of peace he had fought to protect. But as he looked back at the puzzle, a subtle, knowing lift of his eyebrow was his only concession to the victory. It was a permanent, unspoken warning that would echo in the silent chambers of Eleanor Vance's mind for the rest of her life. She had once believed she was the apex predator. He had simply reminded her that the architect of the ocean always holds the final power over the shark.